The wilderness is a wonderful place, filled with life and living creatures, natural, peaceful, and at times terrifying. In Canada, Section 402 of the Criminal Code states, everyone commits an offense who willfully causes unnecessary pain, suffering, or injury to an animal or bird. We are going to explore our relationship to some of the other beings we share the world with, and how we, the most sophisticated species, treat them. Internationally, it is Canada's annual harp seal hunt off the country's east coast that grabs headlines and moves governments to action in Europe. The clash of ideas has gone as far as defensive Canadian government representatives asserting that mother seals do not brood over the slaughter of their young pups. The camera, however, tells a different story. On a media stage, the world would watch and wince. There is a less observed and less understood type of brutality against animals in Canada. Every year, over 4 million wild fur-bearing animals are captured by antiquated and frequently torturous methods. We are going to look at one of the largest animal hunts on the planet and the devices we use to do it. This, more than any other device, is the trap that stirs conscience, the leg hold trap. Invented more than 300 years ago to seize and hold its prey alive in its unrelenting steel jaws. Cruel, and at best for the animal crippling, many fur bearers, once caught, chew off their own limbs to escape. Modern design upgrading of the leg hold has concentrated on ways to reduce the victim's last desperate attempt at freedom.
This one is called a muskrat stop-loss trap, and it's to stop the loss of the animals chewing their way out of the trap. This one is set, the animal's leg is in the trap, and then on a delayed action, this top spring, which is placed there, is released as the animal struggles to get out. The top spring comes over and presses the muskrat down and away so it can't reach its own leg to chew its way out of the trap.
George Clements, a school principal who first discovered traps by accidentally stepping into one during a walk in the woods, is very familiar with modern trapping technology.
This particular trap is designed to jump up further on the animal's leg because the beaver, like the muskrat, tends to quickly chew its own foot because the circulation has been cut off, etc. This one, I hate this trap. Once it's set, the animal steps into the pan in the center. I'll hang on to the springs this way. And the force of the animal's leg on the trap causes it to jump up and catches the beaver higher up on the leg.
Mr. Clements is today Executive Director of the Association for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals, a Canadian humane group committed to educating both the public and politicians.
You know, these things were first brought into the country from England and were used for trapping poachers. And then they were redesigned for the fur trade.
The second most widely used trap is called the Conibear, named after its Canadian designer, Frank Conibear. It is often offered as the alternative to the terrors of the leg hold by virtue of its design to kill an animal and not simply hold it. But the Conibear fails as a killing trap too often, and in failure becomes an agonizing crushing chamber.
Often an animal will try to jump through the trap instead of just putting his head through it. They will attack what is the bait behind it, meaning that they get a portion of their body or an arm or a leg caught in it. I've seen animals with their back broken 3/4 of the way through a trap, unable to move, just laying there suffering. That's all they can do.
Perhaps the simplest trap is the snare, a wire device that, when working, strangles or hangs an animal. In the United Kingdom, where leg hold traps have already been totally banned, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals now focuses attention on the snare. Death by snare is frequently so prolonged and ghastly that researchers in Canada studying snares in a lab refuse to continue testing on live animals. Dr. Ian McTaggart Cowan is a world-renowned zoologist and a humanitarian. He pioneered humane slaughterhouse killing, which subsequently became law. Chancellor of the University of Victoria, chairman of the Canadian Environmental Advisory Council, with doctorates in science, environmental studies, and zoology, he has authored over 200 publications. Dr. Ian McTaggart Cowan is a credible authority.
I think one has to be concerned if you are concerned about the well-being of people and the creatures that we share the world with. I think it's logical and important to be concerned with the humanity of man's actions towards animals.
Anyone that cares about human dignity really has to ask the question, how can we go on treating other organisms in such a terrible way? And that comes down then to the question of the kind of trapping we do if we're going to kill and trap animals. Then it seems to me that from the standpoint of human beings, we've got to develop ways that reduce the amount of suffering and cruelty. We're a long way from that.
Judging by current efforts, we may wait forever. Clearly, wild fur trapping remains in the 1980s a backward practice in a space age of technological innovation. Are we genuinely unable to develop a humane trapping alternative, or have we not yet seriously tried? Dr. David Suzuki of the University of British Columbia.
You know, we've lived through a time when our astronauts have actually landed and walked on the moon, and our radio telescopes probed to the very edge of the universe. And yet at the same time, when science and technology are exploding all around us, we haven't been able to engineer a very simple device to trap animals and in a humane way. And the question is, why is this? Why, when there's so much science and technology, aren't we able to marshal the energy and creative force that will lead to the invention of a simple device? And I think the answer to that is pretty complex, but there are two things to bear in mind. The first is that scientists tend to do research where the action is, where it's sexy. And right now, the sexy areas of research involve oil exploration, biotechnology, microelectronics, space, cancer. These are the hot areas, and that's where our young scientists are attracted and want to make a name in. And so it's not surprising then that an area like the development or engineering of a humane trap is low down on the priority of scientists. But as important, if not more important, is the fact that scientists can't just operate on thin air with just ideas and a piece of paper. They need to have a support staff, they need to buy material, it costs money. And so scientists can only develop new concepts and tools if they have the research monies. And here, if you look at the amount of money that's been spent across the country by politicians, committed by our politicians, you realize they say that they want to develop more humane ways of trapping animals. The amount of money committed is an absolute pittance. It's a scandal to see how much people have committed in British Columbia, for example, a few $1,000s a year. Well, I can tell you, you can't even hire someone working part-time for $3,000 or $4,000 a year. And so I don't understand how people who say they are concerned about developing new devices expect it to happen if they're not willing to commit the monies that are necessary to marshal the creative forces to develop new traps. So I think if people are really interested in developing humane traps, then we have to see an expenditure of money, which by medical standards or by the pharmaceutical industry standards will still be a pittance, a few $100,000. And I feel sure that there are enough imaginative people to come up with something in a short time.
But that level of funding and such an engineering effort does not yet exist. Indeed, the largest amount of money so far spent in Canada went to a government-appointed committee, which after 7 years and the expenditure of over $1 million, issued this report. Criticized as a waste of money, the report provided no conclusive solutions, its authors suspiciously refusing to make public data on which in part it was based. The most hopeful development on the political front has been in the province of British Columbia, home base of the Association for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals. After years of growing public demand for action, BC has promised to ban leg-hold traps for some land species.
There is no doubt that leg-hold traps, land sets, cause suffering which needn't be, which would say, yes, they're inhumane. Not 100%, but in a sufficient percentage of instances that it's something that distresses thinking people.
But the invention of a humane trap is today only a dream. A serious engineering effort is not underway. Suffering continues on a scale that is only expanding. But our disregard for trapped animals goes beyond the inadequate devices of capture. Canadian law actually allows animals to be left unattended in traps indefinitely in all but 2 Canadian provinces. Capable of surviving in a trap for days or even weeks, they wait for a belated conclusion of their suffering by thirst, starvation, or exposure.
Buyers come from all over the world to buy furs here. Every country has buyers.
Luxury is fur this season.
I have a real faith in you people, in all people, being able to feel and to see through our eyes and through what you're able to see on this film that what a terrible thing is going on out there, and that you will feel the same thing that I do, that these are our animals, they're yours and they're mine, and that this kind of unnecessary suffering has got to be stopped.
Fur-bearing animals are not inanimate objects. They are warm-blooded mammals, biologically sophisticated, and from the same evolutionary branch as humans. Science, too, is reconsidering these creatures, and much to its traditional conservatism, finding them to have a complex emotional structure, feelings, perhaps not unlike our own. There is growing confirmation that the differences, physiologically and behaviorally, between humans and the higher vertebrae are slight. This scientific revelation has been known to many of our species, perhaps instinctively, for years. Given this relatively new information, what moral code or principle is there that could allow us to ignore this pain, stress, and suffering? Reconsider the plight of our fur-bearing wildlife. Simple understanding of their situation can make the difference. If you care, do something. Write your provincial representative and tell them this is an important issue to you and you want something done now. It is their responsibility in a free democratic society to take direction from you. Stop what is pathetic, unnecessary, and inhumane. Support the Association for the Protection of Fur-Bearing Animals. Write for more information. Become involved, because you are.
protective legislation. I want your help to prevent needless pain and fear. This is a steel jaw leg hold trap. It's used to catch animals so that their skins can be sold in the fur trade. But it is indiscriminate. Any creature that triggers it struggles in agony till the trapper comes back and clubs, crushes, or shoots it. This trap is not necessary. More than 50 countries have banned it for its cruelty. Please help us end its use in the United States. Ban the steel jaw leg hold trap. Write the Society for Animal Protective Legislation. Post Office Box 3719, Washington, D.C. 20007. Jaw leg hold traps. Fur trappers conceal them in woods and fields. In their desperate struggles, animals break bones and teeth. Some gnaw off their own feet to escape. Please help us ban steel jaw traps. Write the Society for Animal Protective Legislation, Washington, D.C. 20007.